Custom. You live in Dandytown with all your favorite dandy characters like Desperate Dan, Percy Payne, Beryl the Peril, Winker Watson, Corky the Cat, Brain Dwayne, and many, many more. You are a member of the Dandy Club, which is run by Mr. Reynolds, who has been trying to get you into his club for years, but you always turn him down because he's too old and not attractive enough. You say, "All right. Let's get to show." All right. Let's get to show. You walk up to the door and knock on it. A voice comes from inside. "Come in." He said, "I'll give my new dandy home." "What? My new dandy home, come on in," he says as he opens the door. The room was very nice and clean. "It's about time," said Desperate Dan. "Yeah, I'm glad to be here," said Winker Watson. Mr. Reynolds walked over to you and opened his arms wide, welcoming you into his home. "Nothing had to saying," said Corky the Cat. "Well, let me introduce myself then," said Mr. Reynolds. "My name is John Reynolds and this is my son, John Reynolds Jr., he will be joining us soon." You Dan glads to John Reynolds. "Dan, what do you think of John?" asked Winker Watson. "He's handsome," replied Dan. "Oh yeah? What kind of guy is he?" asked Winker Watson. Brain Dwayne gasps, "Oh Sheesh, don't talk so loud," said Mrs. Reynolds. "He's got a great personality, I just wish he wasn't so old," replied Dan. "Wow. Beryl said, what the love is my girl to live." "Ha ha ha, she's a real beauty," replied Mrs. Reynolds. "So what are you guys doing tonight?" asked Dan. "We're going out to eat," said John Reynolds Jr. You John Reynolds Jr. asks, "Hey John, why don't we go out to dinner together sometime?" "That would be wonderful, Dan," said John Reynolds Jr. "Thanks," replied Dan. John Reynolds Jr. You say, "It would something to say." "It would something to say," replied Dan. "Okay, well thanks for inviting me in," said John Reynolds Jr. "No problem," replied Dan. John Reynolds Jr. You if they'll really very soon when Percy finds a girl. "Hey guys, what about that topic?" asked Percy Payne. "I was thinking we could go to a bar and find a girl for Dan to meet," said Beryl the Peril. "Oh, that's a great idea," said Mrs. Reynolds. "Who do you have in mind?" You can Dandytown repeats. "I could definitely go for some Dandytown girls," you say, looking around at the group. "I haven't seen them in a while." "Oh, we'll find someone for you, don't worry," says Mrs. Reynolds. "Great," exclaimed Beryl the Peril. "Yeah, let's do it." It's such a quiet Reynolds family picture. The Reynolds family picture is a beautiful shot of the family, with Mr. Reynolds standing proud and smiling at the camera, his son John Jr. by his side, and their two adorable daughters, Lily and Lily, looking at the camera with big smiles on their faces. It's a moment captured forever in your memory. You say, "Oh no." "Oh no," you exclaim, realizing you missed the perfect opportunity to snap a picture of the whole family. "Sorry, I got a little distracted." "It's okay," says Beryl the Peril, "we can just recreate the moment later." "Yeah, let's just enjoy the moment for now." You agree, feeling a bit embarrassed. Percy Payne runs away to grab Desperate Dan as himself. Percy Payne quickly runs off to grab Desperate Dan, who has wandered off to do something else. You watch as he disappears around the corner, then turn back to the rest of the group. You say, "I got you, Dan." "I got you, Dan," you shout after Desperate Dan, but he's already too far away. You shake your head, feeling a bit disappointed that you didn't get to take a picture of the whole family at the same time. But did Percy think Dan feels a bit anger? But did Percy Payne think that Dan feels a bit of anger? As you ponder this question, you notice that Dan seems to be getting a bit agitated. He clenches his fists and takes a step forward, his eyes narrowing. You quickly realize that he's not angry with you, but something else entirely. What's wrong, Dan? You say, I always realize bin Aunt Aggie has breaking up my house. I always realize bin Aunt Aggie has been breaking up my house, Dan says, his voice filled with frustration. What do you mean, you ask, confused. She's been sneaking into my room and rearranging my stuff, he explains. What did you do? I caught her in the act and yelled at her. You Percy Payne sads about holding shoulder. Percy Payne quickly rushes over to comfort Dan, placing a comforting arm around his shoulder. It's okay, Dan, he says softly. We'll figure something out. Dan looks up at Percy Payne and nods, taking a deep breath before turning back to face the rest of the group. Thanks for your support, guys. You and, so. Desperate Dan and the gang saying goodbye to Reynolds family. You and the gang bid goodbye to the Reynolds family, wishing them luck on their upcoming vacation. As you turn to leave, you catch a glimpse of Dan and Percy Payne standing alone on the street, lost in thought. You wonder what they're thinking about and what they might be going to do next. You say, goodbye. Goodbye, you say, waving goodbye to the Reynolds family as you and the gang make your way back to your car. As you drive away, you can't help but think about what you just witnessed and the potential consequences of Aunt Aggie's actions. You hope that Dan and Percy Payne can work things out and that they'll be able to rebuild their friendship. You were Desperate Dan, Winker Watson, Brain Dwayne, Beryl the Peril and Corky the Cat and more, back to the Dandytown. You and your crew make your way back to Dandytown, eager to show off your new acquisition. As you approach the town square, you see Desperate Dan standing by the entrance, looking around in awe at the sights and sounds of the town. You say, good night. Good night, you shout as you approach Desperate Dan, Winker Watson, Brain Dwayne, Beryl the Peril, and Corky the Cat. They all turn to look at you as you arrive, and you can see the excitement in their eyes as they realize what you have brought back with you. Take a turn. Continue. Retry. Erase.